I just wanted to start by kind of talking about who we are at Resilience. So like I said, we are the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Service Provider Agency for Ottawa and Allegan counties. So our mission is to respond to, reduce, and prevent domestic and sexual violence in Ottawa and Allegan counties. And that's achieved through education, collaboration, and advocacy with supportive services for survivors. So that's why I was excited to connect with you guys, just get that community collaboration piece in together, so we can best serve survivors in our community through that partnership. So today I figured we would talk about, quickly go over some resilience services so you guys have a better understanding of who we are, learn some of the basics of domestic violence, maybe what some barriers are to leaving for survivors, warning signs of abuse or violence within a relationship, the impact that COVID-19 is having on survivors right now, how to safely screen for domestic violence when individuals are calling 211, and how to provide helpful referrals. So I wanted to start by just kind of giving you guys a quote from a survivor that we've worked with, just so you understand how important community collaboration and good support can be with a survivor. So this individual came forward and said, "Without the tangible support we received from Resilience, I cannot say where we'd be. My family may still be in our healing journey, but we're survivors and we're resilient." And that's just such a testament to how resilient individuals really are when they're set up with good support and resources, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so some basics on resilience services. We have some walk-in services and our 24-hour helpline. So we have a crisis line that's staffed 24 hours, 7 days a week, even on holidays. And that is free and confidential services. A client can call in and get some safety planning tips or talk about supportive services through resilience, which we'll get into in just a little bit. They can ask for shelter and we can do shelter assessments if they're not safe staying in their own home, things like that. Our walk-in services are very similar, but it's where somebody can meet with an advocate one-on-one, face-to-face without a scheduled appointment. So if they find they have 20 minutes in the middle of the day and they need to talk to somebody, they can run over, don't need to have an appointment previously made. We have our legal advocacy program, and that's me, I'm the legal advocate. So I'm able to provide courtroom support, help survivors kind of navigate the court process, assist with completing personal protection orders. I also receive direct referrals from the prosecutor's office when a domestic violence case comes across their desk. So I'm able to kind of reach out and try and make contact with survivors of violence and just do some safety planning, offer services, offer support. Our case management services is another program that we offer, and that's where survivors can meet one-on-one with an advocate for education or support. So case management is really designed to empower survivors to establish and meet any personal goals or overcome any setbacks that they have. So that's a lot of domestic violence education, safety planning, looking at, do they need housing or do they need financial education, things like that, really being able to meet those concrete needs of survivors. We do offer therapy services as well for both children and adult. So our adult therapy services, individuals are able to meet with a master's level clinician to increase feelings of safety, reduce trauma symptoms, identify positive coping strategies, just process that trauma, right? And same thing with children, they are able to meet with a master's level clinician who uses age-specific interventions to work with children who've witnessed domestic violence in the home. We do also have support groups. So Resilience offers a wide variety of support groups, starting with Domestic Violence 101, self-empowerment, children's and caretakers support groups. We have an LGBTQ support group coming up. There's a lot of different support groups that we've created to help facilitate group discussion designed for survivors to be able to learn from one another and heal with one another. Just having that community, that sense of community with other survivors can be really empowering and just really healing. So these are the last of our services. We do have emergency shelters, so it's staffed around the clock. Our confidential and safe location house is a residential shelter for adults and children fleeing domestic violence. We do have a supportive housing program as well. So that's a home-based program offering individuals advocacy and help with cost of living expenses for clients who are homeless due to domestic violence. So sometimes individuals who exit our shelter will go into our supportive housing program. Sometimes it's clients that are working with a therapist or a case manager that enroll in our supportive housing program. It is an application. Clients have to fill out an application to be able to get in. And it has to be a client who's working with an advocate on an ongoing basis. So we're looking at clients who are a therapist, a case manager, or somebody who's been in shelter. But we can look at different housing options with individuals who aren't currently engaged in an ongoing service but need housing. And then the last one that we have is our sexual assault nurse examinations. So we do offer SANE exams, which is where there's a registered trained nurse who's available 24/7. They are on call to be able to offer timely, sensitive, and comprehensive forensic medical examinations for adults and teens who have experienced a sexual assault. While the nurse is there doing the forensics examination, we have an advocate, a trained advocate also there to provide emotional support, education, legal advocacy for survivors and their families. Really just be able to offer that support in a scary time, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I figured we could kind of get into some of the basics of domestic violence. I know you guys have a pretty good understanding, or at least a working understanding, of domestic violence, the needs of survivors, how to kind of identify when survivors are calling. But I figured having a review on just some basic domestic violence education would be helpful. So really just remembering
always good, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So really just remembering that domestic violence is the systemic use of physical, verbal, emotional, financial, or sexual abuse to gain power and control over another person. So I don't know, you've probably seen this. This is the power and control wheel that the Duluth model came up with quite a while ago now. But what it does is it really kind of breaks down different ways to understand the patterns of abuse that perpetrators use against their partners sometimes in an attempt to gain power and control or maintain power and control over their partner. So really, like I said, power and control is kind of that root cause of domestic violence. It's one partner seeking that power and control over their partner. So that's kind of at the center of that wheel, because that's where it's all rooted in. And then the outer band, that physical violence and sexual violence, that is kind of the underlying threat of physical violence or sexual violence that might be present within the relationship. So typically that's also the most visible form of domestic violence. For outsiders kind of looking in at a relationship, they're able to kind of see this physical violence that's going on. Sometimes they're not able to see those inner rings or those inner portions. So kind of breaking it down, different ways that perpetrators can kind of gain or maintain power and control over their partners. So they use coercion and threats. So they're trying to manipulate or coerce their partner into doing something, or there's verbal threats of whether that's threats of cutting off finances or threats of physical harm, or threats of making them lose their job, that kind of stuff. Using intimidation is another way. So sometimes that can just be done through gestures and looks, right? Knowing that when you get to know somebody well enough, you kind of know when they get this look in their eye, okay, I need to back off, or I need to get some distance between us. I need to do some safety stuff. So looking for gestures or looks, or it can be words, it can be threats too. Using emotional abuse, perpetrators do a lot of emotional abuse where they'll try and undermine a survivor's sense of self-worth, sense of self-esteem, essentially, trying to break that down to the point where we feel dependent on them or lucky that they love us, those sorts of things. Isolation is a big tactic too. Sometimes that's geographical and we live out in the middle of nowhere and there's no neighbors, nobody close to us to go to for help if we need it. Sometimes that's more relational in kind of cutting us off from our friends or family. So really kind of dictating who we talk to, when we talk to them, what we talk to them about, those sorts of things. Perpetrators often minimize, deny, or blame the violence on the survivor. So they'll say, hey, you're remembering that wrong. It's not that bad. Or say, I don't remember doing that. Like that never happened. Or even things like, well, if you hadn't have done this, if you hadn't have upset me, I wouldn't have responded in this way. So really trying to shift that accountability off of them, not wanting to take responsibility for their actions. Sometimes kids are a portion. So whether that's threatening to take children from the survivor during a custody battle if the relationship ends. Sometimes it's using the children to kind of manipulate the partner emotionally. It can be stuff like that. Using privilege. So that looks like strict gender roles or strict religious roles. For LGBTQ individuals, it could be threatening to disclose the survivor's sexuality if the perpetrator is already out and has disclosed to friends and family. So that kind of stuff. And then using economic abuse. So that's that financial piece of withholding finances, withholding access to finances. Sometimes it's not letting their partner get a job, so they don't have any kind of income that they could use if they left a relationship to kind of support themselves. Does that all make sense?
Absolutely. That's a great explanation, though. I've seen this before, but not really had someone talk through it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm actually, when I email you the link for this training, I'm going to try and email you another version of this power and control wheel that kind of breaks it down a little bit more too. So your staff have that visual that they can look at and review at their leisure too.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I figured we would look at a few of the barriers to leaving or ending relationships for survivors as well. So like I just said, economic dependence is one. So maybe survivors haven't been able to work outside of the home, or they don't have the education or job skills to secure a job. Sometimes they don't have housing options. So really they're financially dependent on their partner, right? Sometimes it's lack of resources or support, so they don't feel supported by friends or family. They don't feel supported by law enforcement or the court system when they've reported. They're finding it hard to obtain safe or stable housing, whether they can't afford it or they can't find it in their area, that kind of stuff. Sometimes they just can't afford to live on their own, I mean, with all of the bills and everything. Sometimes
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes fear is a portion. So lethality increases for survivors 75% when they try to leave a relationship. So what that means is they are 75% more at risk to be murdered by their partner, because their partner is feeling this loss of power and control, which is what domestic violence is rooted in. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a fear of greater physical danger to leave the relationship. Sometimes they're fearful of the court process, of having to go through divorce or legal separation, going through a custody battle, figuring all of that out. It's scary sometimes. Sometimes they're also fearful of retaliation, which kind of goes back into that increase of lethality portion. Sometimes it's social isolation. So just lacking the support of family or friends, having previous negative responses from community members, church members, religious organization members, police, courts, those sorts of systems. And so they're fearful. They feel like they don't have that support. They've been isolated from that, so they don't know how to move forward without it.
Yes.
Yeah, some more barriers to leaving. Sometimes that violence is just seen as normal. So violence starts slow. It escalates over time. It's a gradual thing. It doesn't start full force from day one, typically. So when we live with that constant abuse, sometimes we become numb to the violence that's happening, and we lose our ability to recognize the pattern of violence or the pattern of abuse that's perpetrating itself within our relationship. So it just becomes normal. We don't realize that there's something wrong. Sometimes love, right? So our partner, it's somebody that we love. It's somebody that we started to build a life with. Our partner sometimes keeps making promises of changed behavior, and so we want to believe them, right? We keep giving them chances. That can be part of it too. Negative family pressure is also a barrier to leaving. So just fear of our family's response, fear of a family's religious beliefs, whether they think that, divorce isn't an option, or this is the person that you've committed your life to, try and work it out, hearing things like that can be fearful, can have a negative impact on survivors. And sometimes it's concern for children. That is probably one of the biggest barriers that survivors face, right? So it's fear of losing custody of their kids because their partners made so many threats to take the kids. Fear of emotional damage that a separation is going to have to the kids, or fear of physical damage or emotional damage to the kids when the children are in their ex-partner's care. Because survivors know what their ex-partners are capable of, right? So sometimes it's that fear. So going through some red flags and warning signs. So these are red flags that you can see in perpetrators of violence, or some warning signs that you might be able to see in a potential partner, or in a current partner. So they tend to be really controlling. So they're extremely jealous. They like quick involvement. It's a lot harder to leave a relationship when we're deeply involved, right? So they try and progress that forward pretty fast. Sometimes they place unrealistic expectations or rigid gender roles on us, trying to just control what we do, what we say. Unpredictability. So abusive partners are typically unpredictable. So they have sudden mood changes. Survivors are uncertain whether threats of violence could be carried out a lot of the time, because they've heard these things, and they have to think whether it's something that's an actual possibility or whether it's just a threat, right? Whether it's just a way to control or manipulate us. So manipulation is another warning sign. So constantly blaming others, shifting that accountability like we talked about earlier. Sometimes it's cruelty to animals or even children. So using our emotional ties to either our animals, our pets, or our children. Our partners know that if they threaten to harm our pet or our child, or if they actually harm our pet or our child, we are more willing to do more of what we're not comfortable with in order to protect our pet or our child. And so they'll use that. They'll use us, or use that to manipulate us. Sometimes it's disrespecting boundaries. So that's just when a partner pushes an individual to do something that they're uncomfortable with. So that can be in sexual acts, that can be in financial acts, making them buy something that they don't feel comfortable, or taking out a loan that they don't feel comfortable doing. Sometimes it's disrespecting personal space boundaries. So you've asked them to keep distance and they keep pushing that, they keep coming closer, things like that. And then some signs of abuse in survivors that individuals on the outside might be able to see. And it's important to remember that not all survivors show all of these signs of abuse. And not all of these survivors, is it easy to see all of these signs of abuse or any of these signs of abuse. Sometimes individuals are really good at kind of keeping together a face or a persona outside of the house. And so really kind of trying to be in tune to different warning signs, different red flags in partners, but also signs of abuse in survivors, to be able to help survivors. So their mood might be affected. They might be depressed or fearful, They might even have a flat affect. So that's that kind of numbing. They've just decided that the best way to kind of protect themselves emotionally is to create distance. So they're just kind of numb to everything. They have that flat affect. Sometimes they're isolated, so they're withdrawn. It's hard to make close interpersonal relationships. So relationships with friends or family either aren't as strong as they used to be, or they're kind of non-existent at this point. Sometimes they lack that financial resource, so they don't have a job. They don't have that interpersonal connection with coworkers, with fellow staff, you know. Sometimes survivors are hyper aroused, so they're extremely anxious, they're jumpy. Sometimes it even looks like they're kind of preoccupied, their mind is elsewhere. It's hard for them to focus on what's in front of them. They're just thinking about something else, their head's kind of in the clouds. Sometimes it's physical appearance too, right? So this is probably the easiest sign to see. I know over the phone it's harder because you don't have that visual, but physical appearance. So survivors wear unseasonal clothing sometimes, meaning they're wearing long sleeves, long pants in the middle of summer. Sometimes that's to hide different bruises or injuries, right? Or sometimes it's they're in shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of winter, and it's because their partner has restricted access to warm clothes for them, as a way of abuse, as a form of abuse. And another thing for physical appearance is looking at or trying to identify various stages of healing and injuries or bruises. So not always looking for the visible black eye that is like very dark, but even looking for that light yellow bruising as it's been healing. Have they been able to stay in the house for 3 or 4 days to kind of let that bruise heal, but you can still see portions of it, and trying to identify that kind of stuff. And so the impact of COVID-19 on survivors right now. So survivors are facing a lot of challenges right now. They're at home with their partners a lot of the time, trying to kind of maintain some sort of peace because they don't want this violence to escalate, which it might, because people are in a confined space, right? In their home, tensions rise. So one, survivors are losing jobs. Economic concerns are often cited as a reason why survivors don't leave partners. But right now, with only essential workers going to work, a lot of individuals are being laid off, or losing their jobs right now. So finances are hard right now. We're finding survivors are concerned about how they're able to take care of themselves or their kids. Another thing is survivors are having difficulty with children being out of school. If they are an essential worker and they're at work, they have to figure out daycare. If they're not an essential worker and they're at home, that's a lot of like chaos going on in the home that they weren't planning on doing or dealing with. So trying to come up with activities or ways to kind of keep the kids entertained during this time. Or even trying to help children understand what's going on right now can be difficult.
Yeah.
So having difficulty reaching out to us too, that's another challenge that survivors of abuse are experiencing right now, or other potential forms of support. And a lot of the time that's because they're at home with their abusive partner. It's hard to make a phone call or have a Zoom meeting with a support person when your abusive partner is in the home. You're fearful that they're going to walk in and hear you or walk in and see it, and they're going to become enraged and things are going to escalate, right? So survivors are finding it harder to be able to find the space, find the safety to call resilience or other important support people or agencies. With that, other places of refuge, so places that were safe for survivors. So whether that's school for kids or work for individuals or religious organizations like church, those have all been shut down. So survivors' safe places have all been closed. meaning they're stuck at home with their abusive partner in an unsafe situation with what seems like no respite, right? Sometimes survivors are in need of medical attention, but they might not reach out because they're fearful of being exposed to the COVID-19 virus. So
Sure.
with tensions escalating, if violence is escalating, if survivors are being injured from a physical assault, they're fearful to reach out for that medical care because they don't want to catch something else. And then a few more. So abusers might also withhold necessary items during this time, like hand sanitizer or disinfectants. They might also kind of withhold or even hide insurance cards, threaten to cancel insurance, just prevent survivors from seeking medical attention. That can be a big portion too. Also, abusers may share false information to control or frighten survivors during this time. So preventing them from seeking medical attention if they're having symptoms, but also creating a bigger sense of fear, of worry about the pandemic by giving them false information about it. Travel restrictions are also impacting survivors right now, meaning that a lot of the time safety plans or escape plans mean leaving your home, traveling somewhere. Sometimes it means traveling out of state to friends or family in Chicago or, cross country, and now they're not able to do that. And so that's a huge portion, a huge challenge just for survivors right now. So screening for domestic violence. I know you guys get phone calls, and so kind of starting out by saying like, hey, are you safe right now? Is there anyone in the room? Are you free to speak openly? Asking those kinds of questions. It's easy because they're a yes or no question, and trying to get those out
Right.
first is always a good idea, just to see if a partner's in a room, if the survivor is able to speak freely. If they are, then you can kind of lead away from yes or no questions. If they're not, then you can try and keep it to yes or no questions, so that abusive partners on the other end aren't hearing this full conversation, aren't hearing this survivor getting help. And then the survivor can just say, like, oh, it was a telemarketing call, or, oh, it was a doctor's office calling to check in. They can kind of pan that off onto whatever's believable in this situation, because it's just yes or no questions, right? And another thing, when individuals are calling in for help and asking, for referrals or information, asking follow-up questions, see what the underlying root cause is of this need, right? So talking about, like, if they're calling for financial assistance because they lost their job, you can ask questions about, like, hey, did you lose your job because of COVID-19? Or do you have a partner that has a stable income? Do you have access to that stable income? Is it a partnership where that income kind of mutually benefits the whole family, that kind of stuff. You can also ask questions, so screening for domestic violence when people are calling in, like, are your basic needs being met? Is your partner withholding finances, medical care, food, personal items, that kind of stuff? And really just listen for the signs. Be aware of the red flags and the signs of abuse in survivors that we talked about earlier. And just listen, because survivors will talk, and sometimes you have to ask those follow-up questions. But survivors, when they feel safe, when they feel comfortable, they'll disclose a lot and ask for help. And so being able to make helpful referrals at that point. So really just listening and communicating with the survivor that you believe them, their recount of this violence that's going on in their home, affirm that any violence isn't their fault, express that it's safe to talk to you about their experience, reinforce like how strong and resilient and resourceful survivors are, especially when they have the support of community partners who are able to make appropriate referrals and connections. support them in their decision making, remind them that, you know, for so long the power has been stripped from them by their partner. You're here to help them regain that power for themselves, and you're there to support them with whatever decision they make, but you want to explore the best possible options with them, right? And just directing them to resources that can help. So I know that's like your guys' big job. So referring. And also, you know, if you have survivors of domestic violence calling you guys and disclosing and saying, hey, I need some assistance, connecting them with us, whether that's giving them our hotline number. Right now, our walk-in services are closed because our agency is closed until April 13th. But we do have our 24-hour hotline that's still staffed. So individuals can call our crisis line and get that support that way. And if they want to engage in an ongoing service, we can get that referral in for them for the ongoing service, and get them connected with a case manager or an advocate who can start doing Zoom meetings or phone sessions with them kind of in the interim until we can open back up. So really just like listen, believe, empower, and refer, right? Those are the big things.
Yeah.